West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Richard Tarnas. Hi.
Thank you. I was fortunate enough 12 years ago to analyze 4.2 million birth dates in L.A. County and compare them with domestic violence, restraining orders, and divorce rates.
Really?
Well, yeah, I was on a voter fraud analysis. But
anyway, you came up with
a tremendous correlation between a lack of divorces and domestic violence, and I'm going to throw out some astrology terms. You can explain them. There's just three. When the woman's moon sign was either conjunct or trine with the husband's sun sign, there was very little domestic violence or divorce, and the same with the husband. It's very important in a relationship. You wonder why so many of these celebrities in your relationships don't work out? Because you can be sleeping with literally a toxic vibration. But it's more important to have the woman's moon sign compatible with the husband's sun sign and vice versa than it is to have their sun signs compatible. And you have 144, 12 sun signs, 12 moon signs times 144 arch personality types. You're only going to get along with 36 of them.
All of that was just on the tip of my tongue. Thank you very much.
That's a pretty massive study. It would be nice to see it printed up.
I bet you would. Do you collect that kind of thing? I mean, those underpinning studies that at least move you in the right direction?
I have been so focused on my own historical and psychological research that while I look at those studies, I don't focus on them in particular. And part of the problem with a lot of those studies is that I think there's a resistance of this kind of evidence to statistical analysis, because statistics, it's kind of it's not unlike some of the other topics that you treat on this program, like the how are you going to statistically prove the likelihood of life on other planets or the existence of extraterrestrial beings in interacting with human beings, or in fact, I wanted to ask you this: your own experience, your conviction that there's some kind of life after death. These kinds of things aren't, I think, easily subject to to statistical analysis.
I don't know if I mean, they do a lot of surveys on these kinds of things. And
you can do a survey on how many people believe something, but can you do something? But I'm talking about just like you can do a survey on how many people statistically believe in astrology, but I was talking about the reality of astrology, or the reality of life after death, or the reality of extraterrestrial.
Well, it seems to me, though, that some of those studies with numbers like that couldn't do your cause any harm.
No, that's why I said it would be very interesting to see it. To
see the numbers. Yes, on the international line, you're on the air with Richard. Hi.
Hi there. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Yes, I had to say Dr. Tarnas. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead.
I was wondering how comfortable Dr. Tarnas feels with the yogic ideas that a single human consciousness has more than one level, particularly in terms of subtle bodies such as the astral and perhaps higher.
I'm very comfortable with that. It seems, I think anybody that has done sufficient interior exploration would agree with that.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Take care, sir. First-time caller line, you're on the air with Richard Tarnas. Hi.
Oh, hello. This is Sandra in Ohio. Art, you had mentioned something about afterlife and questioning that. I've been a professional astrologer and medium for 20 years with a sideline in biomolecular medicine and medical research.
Yikes.
Yeah, I know. I actually wanted to make a couple of comments and then ask your guest his opinion on those comments. First of all, just a general comment, astrology seems to show energy structures, and then we have the opportunity to play within those structures and use our free will in that play.
Right.
That sounds good.
And then also what I've found is that those structures act like a kind of a computer program in that unless we make free will choices, we seem to get a kind of a default of an old consciousness pattern on individual levels as well as group consciousness levels. Does that seem to make sense?
I'm not getting the default part.
Like with a computer program, you can type in your instruction or select A, B, or C, and if you don't make a selection, you hit the Enter key, you get the default.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, then basically you're the unconscious puppet of the structure, as you're.
Yes.
Yes. That's a good. Yes. You're very good at putting these things in clear, simple to understand terms.
Oh, thank you. Now the other what I was leading into is the whole idea of free will versus fate with what's coming up in the next few years. You mentioned the aspects about the T-square and the Pluto involvement with all of this. I won't get really astrological here, but Pluto seems to be very much involved in mass consciousness shifts.
Yes.
And like in the mid-'60s, you had mentioned that 64 through 66, we had the Beatles coming onto the scene and the whole going from the 50s into the 60s, nuclear family, and then free will and free love and all that. And we have these Pluto aspects coming up now. We're looking at, I think, the potential to make some big changes. And if we don't do anything, if we sit back and kind of let things happen, it looks like we might get the default. I guess my question would be how much, in your opinion, how much do you think we can make a change here in these upcoming, say, 5 to 10 years using those Pluto aspects?
Well, I want to be cautiously optimistic simply because I feel that a certain amount of optimism helps the game along in a positive direction. But if we get another very reactionary administration that essentially is blind to the need for making changes and keeps going in the default position, I think we will have little grounds for optimism.
Oh, boy, did your politics just come out and bite.
But don't you think as the people, the citizens, that we can use that Pluto energy also to kind of work with that administration, work with it, is putting it kindly?
Yeah, absolutely. And we sometimes have to remind ourselves that if you go back to the 60s, even though we recall it as having all this emancipatory energy moving towards freedom and rebellion and so forth, the presidents that were elected then were Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon in 1968 at the kind of climax of the counterculture. So I think you're right to bring up the fact that there can be a difference between who's elected president or where the administrative power is versus where many individuals and even a very large part of the mass consciousness can move in contrast.
Well, thank you.